Today on the Dolby Creator Talks podcast, we welcome cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto to discuss his incredible work on Killers of the Flower Moon, his fourth collaboration with legendary director Martin Scorsese, for which Rodrigo has gained his fourth Academy Award nomination. This is all part of our continuing coverage of the 2024 Academy Awards. We are once again interviewing as many nominees as we can possibly talk to in the sound and cinematography categories, as well as Best Original Score. So please make sure you're subscribed. Killers of the Flower Moon is nominated for 10 Academy Awards this year, including Rodrigo's Best Cinematography nod. And he is having quite the year because his other movie he had come out this year is the biggest movie of the year, Barbie. Rodrigo has obviously worked with some of the best directors in the business. So I started our conversation by asking him how he got started in cinematography and where that passion came from.
Well, yeah, cinematography is a type of job description that not many people understand or even know what it is. And I include myself. In my family, there weren't really any people in film in Mexico City. I had one uncle that was a playwright, and that was it. And he'd done a few documentaries. So he knew a little bit about it, and I was still fascinated. My entry into film was through stop motion, because my brother and I, we used to do little clay monsters and stuff for haunted houses we used to do in Halloween and in our home in Mexico City. And my father had a Bell & Howell 8mm camera. So he showed us that we could do frame by frame, and he explained stop motion to us. I must have been 10 or 11 at the time. So we filmed our little monsters and projected them, actually rear screen projection on sheets in our haunted houses. And suddenly our little monsters were big and moving. They were alive. That got me hooked forever. Because I also enjoyed horror movies and also, by the way, Ray Harryhausen and his movies, Jason and the Argonauts, that sort of thing. So, but I didn't know that was a career. That was something you could work on. And eventually, someone told me there was a thing, film school, and I was, wow, so I can keep on playing. I can keep on doing my little monster movies. And, so that's what led me to film school. And eventually I started working with a still photographer as an assistant, Nadine Markova, in Mexico City again. And that's what got me interested in photography. And eventually both things melded together. And I found that cinematography was the most playful thing of filmmaking. I found it more playful than directing, because in film school, at least, directing was such a big responsibility. It was all very serious, and you had to be very cultured and knowledgeable. And I was like, no, I just want to play. So nobody bothered me as a cinematographer. I could do whatever. And that's what really led me down that path, and I've loved it ever since.
I love that you referenced you started in stop motion. I have over my shoulder here one of the Martians from Tim Burton's Mars Attacks, back when the original iteration of that movie was a stop motion film, as an homage to Ray Harryhausen.
Amazing, yeah, love that. Oof, that's a good one.
So, Rodrigo, you're nominated this year for Killers of the Flower Moon, but you also shot another movie this year, which was the most successful film of the year, Barbie, for director Greta Gerwig. What an amazing year you've had. Both films are so unique and stylized and powerful in their cinematography as a way to tell story through images. But they could not be more diametrically opposed to each other visually, I feel. I wonder, in all of that, is there a signature Rodrigo Prieto visual style, or are you a chameleon that just fits whatever the needs of a particular story are?
I would describe myself more as a chameleon, because I just enjoy living different worlds. And, in cinema, we have, or filmmakers, we have the opportunity to kind of live many different lives in our careers, and in different places, in different countries, and just different worlds, and exploring these worlds that directors are imagining, and trying to put myself in their perspective and understand how a director sees their vision or their world or this story is exciting to me. Just trying to not necessarily be the me that has been already, and what my experience and my ideas, and do that again. I find that boring. I prefer to see what other people are seeing, and learn from them, and then build on that. And that's a joy to me, and listen to Greta come up with ideas, and suggesting my own, and just coming up with a way to say film Barbie Land. What is Barbie Land? It didn't say on the script what it was. We had to figure it out. And also, Killers of the Flower Moon, understanding the story, the characters, and designing a look for it that would not detract the audience, or distract, I must say, the audience. I don't like to put myself as a cinematographer on top of the story and make amazing visuals that's where the audience goes, as opposed to following the characters and the emotional moment for each scene. So that for me is the emphasis. What do we want to say, or more accurately, how do we want the audience to feel on every moment or every beat of a story? So that's my guiding light in the script and the director, and then everything just based on that. So that's why it looks different, because it just automatically has to be, because it's such a different story, and I really thrive in that. I enjoy doing very different type of imagery.
You've obviously been working with Scorsese for a while now, and you guys have collaborated on multiple films. I'm kind of curious where the process starts. He's so renowned for being a visually dynamic storyteller. And so where does that process start for you? Obviously, I'm sure you sit down with a script, but tell me about those initial conversations that you have with Scorsese about how the film is going to look, and how you start the process of figuring out what your work is going to be.
It varies, certainly. And the stories I've worked with Scorsese on are very different as well. So every time it is a different way how we approach figuring out the cinematography and the look of a movie. I remember on The Irishman, it all started a passing conversation where he said, I'd like this movie to be like a home movie, but I don't want it to be handheld and grainy. Okay, so how do you do a movie that's not like that? So then that's exciting for me, because then I have to kind of interpret that. In this case, I think I was just following along as Scorsese was developing the script, because it kept changing, or there was a big change, as you may know, that the original script was more focused on the FBI story and Tom White and this and that. So that changed, and the perspective and point of view of the story changed. So obviously that was the focus of Scorsese. He was dealing with that, trying to understand that. And all along, I was just listening and proposing ideas of how we could, for example, differentiate the worldview, or visually differentiate between the white folk, the descendants of the Europeans, and the Osage, for example, if we even wanted to do that. And indeed, it is something that Scorsese wanted to do. And so I started looking into still photography of the time, and color still photography, and found many images that were made with this technique to create color that was called autochrome. So that became the basis of the way we see Ernest and Hale and the white people, because that color technique is imported from Europe. It's the Lumiere brothers that invented it. So the Osage and their rituals, whenever they're not, let's say, incorporating themselves into the white people's world, when they're doing their rituals in their own life, say, for example, Mollie praying to the sun at dawn, that was shot with as naturalistic color as possible. So it's a subtle difference, but it's there in the beginning, until Mollie's sister's house, Rita, her house blows up, and everyone from then on is in hell, let's say. So the look changes. At that point, we used ENR emulation, which has much more contrasty and harsh and desaturated in color. And then there's another look towards the end of the film that's based on 3-strip Technicolor, which is very colorful, because the last scene, the coda of the movie, last beat in the radio station happens in the 30s. So the color for that scene is based on the color of cinema at the time, three-strip Technicolor. So in a way, the movie is how stories are told, because we see the newsreel footage in the beginning that we shot with Scorsese's 1917 Bell and Howell camera, and then we see the photos of the time. At the end, we see the radio show. So it's how do we tell stories? So I thought photography was a good way to express that visually.
Well, you teed up so many questions that I have for you in your answer to that question. But I want to follow up on something you just talked about, the sequence with Mollie, where she's basically, she has that ritual of praying to the light. And to the sun. And I was so struck. It's almost like the sun, I feel, is another character in the film. And it's such a strong motivator for your lighting. I learned that you did a lot of preparation and research on Osage culture and rituals, and I'm kind of curious. Could you talk about your research process and their relationship with the sun and how that affected how you wanted to shoot the sun and depict the sun in the film?
Immediately, I wanted to buy all the books that I could on the Osage culture, and I soon discovered there's not almost any literature and books of studies or of the Osage talking about their own rituals. I mean, there are people that had been there, in the 1900s and wrote a little bit about it, but not really much. So it became a matter of asking them right there. And that was a big advantage of being in Oklahoma or Osage country. So that was beautiful because they were very open to helping us in this research. And one of the first things that I remember when we first went to start scouting was this dinner where it was a reunion with around 250 Osage. And we sat down with them and chatted, and it was a traditional dinner. And a lot of the people there stood up and spoke about themselves and their families and their concerns, their worry about what we were going to do, how we were going to depict the Osage. And it was very interesting. So I saw how Scorsese behaved. He wasn't giving speeches and saying, we're going to do this and that. He was listening. And I think that opened their hearts to help us, to tell us what they had in their minds. And so I took advantage of that and started asking many questions. And I learned that, for example, the villages are built in relation to the sun, the orientation of the sun. And there's a main street that goes east-west. And there's, I don't remember all the details right now, but a lot of it I remember was based on the sun and the sun position. And even the rituals, certainly the prayer at dawn, obviously facing the sun. So the sun's important there. Burial happens when the sun is at the zenith. So, okay, that's usually a time of day you don't want to shoot as a cinematographer. You want to avoid it. But I thought it was important, to respect that. And so we decided to have the sun in frame in those moments. And that's why precisely there's a scene of Mollie's mother's burial and the camera's looking straight up at the sky and the sun's at the zenith. And we have the person who's leading the ceremony with a feather and moving it like that. And the sun's flaring the lens as it moves the feather. And, these were things that we didn't tell him, okay, move the feather like that. That's what he was doing. And it just happened to flare like that, But what we did do is we were very careful. We knew we were going to shoot anamorphic, but anamorphic flares are usually very modern looking. So Dan Sasaki at Panavision but he adapted the T-series anamorphic lenses for us with different coatings so that these flares would be warm instead of blue, and also a little bit of detuning, it's called, of the lenses, so they wouldn't be as sharp, to have more of a period feel. So there were, things like that, but that was all based on what we learned from the Osage. So these are shots that aren't meant to be cool or, we're honoring, hopefully, the way they themselves honor the sun. And also I brought in the sunlight to light some of these rituals. For example, in the very beginning of the movie, when the ceremony of burying the pipe, I knew that these huts had a hole in top of it, for smoke and all that. And I said, well, maybe we can have the sun coming in through that gap and bouncing off of the ground. And that's what lighting the faces of the people. So the presence of the sun, I brought into the interiors, like that scene. And then there's another scene in a big, get together, where Hale is present and Ernest and Mollie. Again, I brought the sun into that. It was just a way of representing their worldview.
I love the way you talk about shooting Oklahoma, and I wanted to ask you about that. You talked about in some ways it was a gift, but so I grew up in North Texas, not very far away from where you shot the film, and I know that landscape is very powerful, very austere. But it's also kind of monotonously flat. So I'm curious for you, sort of what did that open up for you? What were the challenges of actually capturing the landscape, and how did you address that?
Yeah, Scorsese went to Oklahoma before I did, originally. And also a big part of that trip was to speak with the elders and basically get permission to tell this story. And he came back and he told me that he was just blown away by the scope of these places, these landscapes. And, he wanted to see how we could capture that, if it was 3D or how to do that. And he said, he jokes that he's from Manhattan and tenements, and that he for him, what's the sun? Where is the sun? He's and oh, this is grass. What is this green thing? Grass. Anyway, he's funny about that. But I knew that. I saw some of the photos of the locations, and then of course I went. But I knew that when you're there physically, you feel that size and the sky and all that, but on a two-dimensional screen, you don't capture that, right? So I knew that was a challenge. And certainly the first thing we talked about was anamorphic lenses and the widescreen, to be able to incorporate as much as possible in the frame, the horizontal landscape. But I knew that was a challenge. So when we were scouting locations, I tried to find places that had some movement to them and that weren't completely flat, to get that sense of depth. And that's cinematography. A big part of it is creating the illusion of depth with lighting, but also with composition. And when you're photographing a landscape that's pretty flat, that becomes a little tricky. But yeah, we did our best, and I think it's effective because it's besides it's authentic, and it really, I do think, puts you in the place, in the real place.
I know that you adopted a hybrid approach to shooting. You captured, I think, the majority of the film digitally. I'm sorry, you captured the majority of the film on negative, but you also shot a lot digitally. Can you talk about sort of your experiment process and your prep process, and how you derived at what you needed to do one way versus the other, and what drove those decisions?
Well, since early on, we knew that the scenes with the Osage we wanted to capture as naturalistic as possible. Really, film negative still captures the most color depth of any format. So that was a given for us. We wanted to shoot on film. Then reading the script, I saw many night exteriors and many scenes that would have to be shot at dusk, which is a time of day that's very short, too short for filming. You can get one shot, maybe two, right? And then it's gone. And that's a big challenge as a cinematographer. And then some really big scenes, outside at night. And so I decided, and we were able to use the best of both worlds, where we shot film negative for most of the film, where it was possible to, either light it or day exteriors or day interiors, or some of the night scenes are not too huge, so I could light them. But the issue with night scenes is that moonlight doesn't just light an area in a big landscape. It lights the mountains, everything, right? So really, you'd have to shoot day for night. And we actually did that for a couple of moments, but I approached the nights in different methods. So whenever it was day for night, it was shot on film. But some of the night scenes we shot dusk for night. So we actually shot when the sun had disappeared, and the light, as you can imagine, changes very quickly until it goes away, right? So the cars, we adapted all the headlights of the cars so that we used LED lights on them, remote controlled, so we could dim them to match the way the light was disappearing. But with a digital camera, I was able to shoot a longer. Say with film negative, perhaps once the sun's gone, I could maybe shoot for half an hour max. It's not magic hour; it's magic 25 minutes. So, but with a digital camera, I was able to extend that to maybe 40, 45 minutes. So those 15 minutes are crucial. And so that was one reason to use digital. And there are other night scenes that are in Fairfax. And we learned that at this period of terror, people would put up what they called frayed lights, which is light bulbs in front of their houses, just to pieces of wood with a string with bulbs. And inspired on that, I created huge rigs of lighting that were basically light bulbs strung in frames, different types of frames. Huge, like one of them was about, I think about 30 by 20 feet, or I think maybe 40 by 20, hung from an industrial crane on top of, in Pawhuska, in the main stretch there for the dance scene at night, for example. And there were other scenes that we used these rigs, and that doesn't emit much light, all these light bulbs. So digital cameras were very effective for this. We used the Sony Venice camera, and we could shoot at 2500 ISO, whereas on film, I could perhaps pushing the film go to 800. So I had much more exposure, and so I was able to use the best of both worlds, really.
I know it's very important for Scorsese, obviously, to the performances in the film are amazing, and I know that he often will shoot dialogue scenes with multiple cameras in order to capture spontaneous performance as much as possible. I know that that's always complicated for a cinematographer. So have you adopted sort of what's your approach to giving him the flexibility he wants and still maintaining an interesting, or I guess a good look?
Yes, it is challenging, and the first time I had to deal with that was on 25th Hour with Spike Lee many years ago. And he, from the very beginning, said, all right, we're shooting every dialogue scene with two cameras. And that's it. So I had to, start developing back then that techniques for that. And I remember that one, that there was a challenge because Philip Seymour Hoffman's character had glasses and a hat and a baseball cap on. So you can't light from above, because the hat will block the light. You can't light from beneath because you'll see the light reflected on the glasses. So it was tricky. But that's the kind of thing that I find interesting, those challenges. And you figure it out. You use the way you understand light and how it behaves, and how it's like pool, where you hit the ball in a certain way and it'll hit the other ball and then it'll ricochet like this. Well, light, the same thing, where you put the light, how it reflects on a object or a face, and how that comes to the camera. So, yes, I have developed a technique to do that, and it varies obviously depending on the location, the moment, and all that. But it is tricky because you have to be sure that it doesn't look like it's like it's done first of all with two cameras, or it doesn't even look like it's done with a camera. Period. I always strive for it to look like you're there and you're witnessing it. But you want to get light into the actor's eyes, and you want to, see their expression, but you want to create depth, you want to create drama, so what would be a backlight for one actor is a front light for the other. So figuring out how to do kind of an equal look for both actors is a challenge, but I've adapted it. And I even, I directed a movie recently in Mexico after Killers of the Flower Moon. I directed and shot it. And now, as a director, I know we can do that, right? And you really use the energy of the actor. So I was able to incorporate these techniques into my own directing. But it's challenging, but it's a good challenge.
Well, since you brought that up, now I'm curious. I knew that you had just directed your own film, and I'm kind of curious where, what an amazing challenge for you to both direct and shoot the film yourself. Did you think about having another cinematographer work with you to shoot? And I'm curious, now that you've directed, is that going to change the way you shoot moving forward?
Well, yes, I did work with another cinematographer. I co-shot it with Nico Aguilar. Yes, he's a wonderful, super talented young cinematographer. And he had been shooting second unit for me on some projects. And in fact, on Killers of the Flower Moon, he did some additional photography, like the beautiful moon shot in the movie, the moon behind some branches. He shot that. So Nico came on to the movie I directed as a co-cinematographer. So we both shot it together. Um, well, I don't know if it changes the way I shoot. One thing that I have been learning as a even shooting, directing short films is that I put on the hat of the director, and even though I'm shooting, the director matters a little more that, so I've done shots when I'm directing that perhaps as a cinematographer I'd suffer a little bit more. I'd be or the cinematographer in me is cringing, but we need this shot. I know we don't have time to relight it, so it's gonna live like that, and the light's gonna be a little flatter, but that's what it is. So I understand, I think, through directing more the perspective of the director and the actors, really, and how what's most important on a set is that the actors are comfortable and are not distracted by the paraphernalia of cinematography, and that actually, as a cinematographer, you kind of have to disappear a little bit. They don't need to be aware of you.
I know there were some kind of some fun opportunities for you on this film, and tell me a little bit about the newsreel footage. I know you shot with an antique Bell and Howell camera that actually Scorsese was from his own collection, right? So tell me about getting that camera and shooting those sequences.
Yes, I was actually a little bit scared of that, because it's you don't know if the camera is going to have any issues that's been sitting there for a long time. Actually, although actually he has used it here and there for some small projects. And so what we did is we sent it to Panavision, had them oil the camera and get it ready. And then every lens, we looked at the parallax, because it's not reflex. You don't see through what the lens is seeing. You see through a separate eyepiece. So we had to learn parallax, learn how to do it, and shoot it and test it and see. Oh no, we're not framing it. So it was a process for us to learn. And then the rhythm of the cranking of the camera also was a thing. What we did is that the operator wasn't doing it. It was Trevor Loomis, the camera assistant. So he learned the song. I don't remember which one it is, but he'd be there cranking it, and it was fun. And what you see in the film, the aperture is the actual aperture of the camera. So that's why you see the edges are a little scraggly, and it's not a visual effect or anything. It's the actual aperture of the camera. And most of those in the end were done by second unit. That was Ellen Curris directed that second unit, and Darren Liu shot it. So I did a few of them, but she did most of them, and they're very realistic. I mean, you look at the film; they look exactly. In fact, there are a couple of clips that are actual home movies that the Osage did, like the airplane landing. That one we did. That one's actual, but it matches pretty good with what we did.
So if I can beg your indulgence, there are a few scenes that kind of jumped out at me when I watched the movie again. And I would just love for you to, just to quickly kind of ask you about them. And you can tell me sort of about your approach to lighting them and the composition and how you accomplished the look of some of these sequences. The first one that I wanted to ask you about is that very first dinner scene in Mollie's house between Mollie and Ernest, and then the storm that comes through. That was such a remarkably beautiful and still scene of stillness for me that I'd love to hear you talk about your experience of lighting and shooting that scene.
One thing you always have to think of as a cinematographer is the practical matters, and how to approach a scene where it'll have the atmosphere and the look you're going for, but at the same time that the day is achievable, and the other days in the same location. So you're thinking of all these things. So this place was built by Jack Fisk. It's Mollie and her mother's house. And he built it on location on this piece of land that has a river on it and has a hill across the river, where he built some, structures that look like Gray Horse, which is where they're all from. Amazing. And we were able to locate the house and orient it for the sunset, which we did sunset for sunrise. So the moments that are supposed to be sunrise are actually sunset, things of this sort. So it was really wonderful. But the house itself, including the second floor, we didn't shoot any soundstage. It was right there on location. So it was really like shooting in an actual house, which it was. But I had to make sure that the lighting rigged into this place could work for the daytime scenes and the nighttime scenes. An advantage of LED lighting is that now you can have the same unit create warm light like tungsten, and then the same unit change it for daylight. So I had throughout the dining room and living room a series of very low profile panels with LED little lights on them through diffusion, that I was able to do a top light for the table that would match the lamp that was on top of it, and dim it way down so that it would again match the oil lamps and the very low level tungsten light. And Jack Fisk made the wood, which is accurate to the period, pretty dark, so it becomes a very intimate moment with this warm chiaroscuro, of lighting that really falls off. And again, 2 cameras for the dialogue. And the thing about this scene is that it happens at night, but many of these scenes we should shoot during the daytime. So we have to create little tents around each window with maybe a small unit of light that creates sort of a moonlight effect. But then Scorsese heard of this story of like 2 days before we shot the scene. Someone talked about this idea of a storm, and that he was in the house of an Osage and the storm happened, and exactly what happens in the scene. So he wanted to incorporate it. So suddenly it's like, Rodrigo, you have to, make it possible for rain to happen during this scene at night, but you're shooting during the daytime. Okay, so we had to immediately pivot and make these tents much bigger and put lighting for rain and make it possible for the rain rig to fit, challenges like that. So it seems the scene is very still because that's what it is about, but to make it that way is not still at all.
Well, I think one of the things I love about that story is, you prepare so meticulously. Scorsese obviously has a very clear idea of what he wants the thing to look like visually. And then an idea comes up and you pivot and you go with it. You have to just maintain flexibility on the day.
Absolutely. And many moments like that happen in his movies, but have happened on Killers of the Flower Moon. And when an actor suggests something, he will usually go for it. So we have to be ready to precisely pivot. One of my favorite moments like that is the scene right after Ernest goes to look at the aftermath of the explosion of Bill and Rita's house. And he sees this, and he now is realizing the scope of the horror, what they're doing. And he comes back home. He's wrought with guilt. Scorsese had designed a shot, an idea that was just coming in through the doorway, through the porch, and finding the family in the living room, say, for example. And so it was just a point of view of Ernest, and then she would say, "So what happened?" Right? So I prepared that. It was lit for that. And then on that same night we were shooting, he asked Mollie, right? And Ernest is walking in, and he tells her, "So where do you think you would be at this moment?" And I'm thinking, oh, she's going to say the dining room or the living room. And it's lit for. She says, well, I would go to the basement. Basement? What basement? And we didn't even know if there was a basement on this location. And suddenly, okay, locations, look for a basement. And we went through the kitchen, opened the door. Oh, there's a basement there. So now I had to prepare a shot that went through the house, into the kitchen, and through the door to the basement, right? Immediately, because we're shooting that night. So I need a light source. Go get an oil lamp for the basement. That sort of thing. And the end result is so much more powerful, really. The camera going through this living room and hearing a baby crying, a young child crying, which was real. That's a sound that was happening at the moment. And the camera goes and opens and sees her down there in the depth. It's so much more symbolic and powerful. And her looking at him up there and screaming in pain. One of my favorite moments in the movie. And it all came from Scorsese listening to his actors.
One of my favorite scenes visually in the film is when Robert De Niro's character Hale sets fire to his own ranch in order to collect some insurance money. And obviously, this is a trope of these films. The Prairie Fire. Can you talk about? But you achieved a very interesting, distinctive look for that. Can you talk about that?
One influence for that was Days of Heaven, Nestor Almendros, and the epic fire scene that wasn't lit. It was just the fire. And I remember so strongly these images of the silhouettes of the people trying to put out the fires. So I thought, okay, we'll do something like that. So we set it up where we see a wide shot of the house and, all these pipes with gas pipes that are hidden underneath the ground, and we have to super design that. And where's the fire going to be? So I asked the special effects people to put some fires deep in the background beyond the house, precisely to create silhouettes of people who are, milling about. And then, there were other fires, but that for me was what would create the silhouettes. And then we added in front of the lenses of the cameras. We shot it with 2 or 3 cameras. One was a wide shot. We added flame bars, just a bar with small flames to create a little bit of distortion, so that the image would have these ripples of heat, the distortion of heat. But what happened was that it doubled up, because we had these small flame bars close to the lens, but then maybe 50 feet away with a long lens, long focal length telephoto, the big fire that was in the foreground, but out of shot of the tight camera, it was set up for the big wide shot, created a layer of heat waves that was much more powerful and stronger. And it looks like the image is sort of, being distorted kind of in a liquid way, but that's all it is a distortion of the heat. And what we discovered as we were shooting was that if we pull the focus to the distortion, as opposed to trying to focus on the silhouettes in the background, that's where it really became surreal. And so that's what we did. But we really discovered it right there in the moment. We didn't even test it beforehand. And it was stunning to see as we were shooting. It was mesmerizing. So, and Scorsese had already prepared, unbeknownst to me, some choreography in the background. So that's why the people move in very strange ways back there. That's actually very designed. I was like, what's going on? Why are they doing these weird things? And that's why it was this choreography that he had planned.
One of the things I loved about that is, obviously, Mollie is very sick at that point. And we go back to her house and she's in bed and she's sort of delirious, but we see the flames in the windows there. It doesn't logically make any sense because their house is miles away from the Hale Ranch, but it's just so magical. You kind of just got away with it. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, that's one of those things that Scorsese, pushes the medium to a certain extent. He'll allow himself a certain surrealism, and especially in a moment in the story where we're so involved and Ernest is now kind of losing his mind, and Mollie also, certainly, she, for the drugs the sickness and the drugs that she's getting, and Ernest for his guilt. So it's not out of place to be surreal then. And I remember Scorsese saying, could we have some projection onto the walls of fire, light? And I was, well, this room has all these shears on them, the shades actually that go down to the bottom. So it would be a little too weird for the fire to be projected on the wall because it can't go through, So I proposed the idea of projecting the firelight onto the screens themselves. And so I came up with a lighting effect that was basically Mylar and 10Ks through different color gels, bounced off Mylar that was being shaken by, some grips. And that's what's projecting on the windows. So it's a little bit theatrical and totally unrealistic, but he liked it, and so we went with that. It's supposed to be strange, not realistic.
Final question that I have for you. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I got the experience. I got to see Killers of the Flower Moon in a Dolby cinema, in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, and it was such an amazing experience. The just the contrast, the richness of the blacks, the detail that was in that photography, and some of those. I'm thinking about the scene where Ernest meets Hale's lawyer and all of his allies at the end. It's just sort of like almost like a Godfather kind of scene, and its inkiness in the blacks. What's your participation in the grading process? Tell me about kind of your involvement in that final step.
For me, it's crucial. It's really the cinematography is built in the set, certainly on set, but it's like editing in a way, or sound mixing. You're really taking all these ingredients that you've captured and you found in the field, a little berry that is delicious, but that berry is nothing until you mix it with this and that, and then the color comes out. And for me, that's a process of color grading. And indeed, Dolby Vision to me is a premium cinematic experience. Not IMAX or any of that, which is also pretty great because it's big, big and spectacular. But Dolby Vision is so perfect. I mean, just in terms of like you say, the rich blacks and the highlights with detail, and it's closer to my experience of life, where you can see something very bright, but you still see it, but it is bright, but you see it. And also the shadows, you have detail in the shadows, but there's also black. It's perfect. I love Dolby Vision, but it's sometimes challenging to, the color grading you've done in P3, let's say, to take it to Dolby Vision. You discover things that, okay, you can actually see that piece of equipment out the window. So now you have to deal with that, or some things that you didn't even know were a little bit milky because, regular digital projection is the blacks are lifted. So, the scene is actually milky. We have to bring those blacks down, So I don't know. It's a process that I enjoy enormously. Color grading is one of my favorite parts of cinematography. I work with Ivan Lucas, who he's an amazing color grader that I've worked with for many years since the movie Alexander with Oliver Stone. So he also enjoys Dolby Vision. And Thelma was pretty involved too. She in all of Scorsese's movies, is part of the color grading experience. And so we share that. And it's challenging for me sometimes because she becomes so used to what she's seen for months in the edit in her monitors and all that, and Scorsese himself as well, right? And I have an idea of what I wanted to do, and she has an idea of what they've been seeing, So it's sometimes a bit of a challenge, but we always get to a good point together.
People get used to what they've seen, and sometimes it's a little bit of shock when you bring in a new element. Rodrigo, this has been such a fun conversation. I love this movie. Your cinematography was fantastic. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I appreciate it enormously.
Many thanks to Rodrigo for joining us on the podcast today and talking about the amazing work on Killers of the Flower Moon. Best of luck to him on March 10th at the 96th Academy Awards, which are going to be coming to you live from the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. Apple TV Plus is where you can currently watch Killers of the Flower Moon in glorious Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. We'll have a link, as always, in our show notes. And speaking of awards, as I mentioned up top, this episode is part of our continuing coverage of the Academy Awards. If you'd like to hear more conversations with fellow Oscar nominees in this category and more, be sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. Many of these awards are tough to pick and predict, and we will continue to offer these in-depth conversations filled with unique insights into the work of each of these nominated films, which may make it just a little bit easier for you to fill out your Oscar ballot, whether you're an Academy voter or you simply want to do better in your annual office pool for the Oscars. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, please be sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you will find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, thanks again for joining us. This is the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thank you for joining us.